Hi my friend, in this video we're going to be making Melodic Tech House drums inspired by HELLMATE and Santiago and Carlitos' version of Show Me Love. We're going to find out if we can do it in under 30 minutes using the 80-20 rule of Tech House drums. And what you're listening to right now is the track that we'll be working on, and what you're looking at right now is the Ableton project file that we'll be working on. In particular, we're going to be focusing on this group here, this drums group, and what we'll be doing is soloing each of these tracks one by one in the order that I actually created this track, so that way you can follow this workflow when you're developing your own drum tracks as well. All in all, it did take me about 30 minutes to recreate these drums. We'll be going over it a lot faster in this video though. And all in all, as you can see here, this track took me about 6 hours to complete, and it's completely mixed, mastered, arranged, all that, and it's ready to go. And if you need help finishing songs faster as well, I've made you a free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that I use to completely finish one song every single week. Just visit the link that's in the description or on screen now to grab the Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit for free. And with that said, let's jump into this. Alright. So what I have here is I've soloed out the kick. It's the first element that I usually build out when creating drums. And so let's dive into this. So the first thing here is let's take a look at the MIDI. So I just want to jump in. And so you can see here that for the most part, this is just like a classic 4 on the floor, 1, 2, 3, 4. In terms of one little trick is that you can see here, there's like a da 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 that happens every 8 bars. And we'll just wait for that to come in, just so you can kind of hear it. Just a little trick kind of happens there. So that's in terms of the pattern. In terms of the sound, this is where things get a little bit more interesting. So right now you can see I'm using the Ableton Simpler device over here. And if you look at the sample that's being played, you'll notice that it's HELLMATE, Santiago, and Carlitos, Show Me Love extended mix. And the reason for that is because I actually do have that song in here as a reference track. And what I've done is simply looked for a spot in the song where the kick is more or less by itself and it's unobstructed by any kind of melodic instruments like a bass or anything like that. And so when you do this, what I'd recommend is, you might notice here it says extended mix. Look for extended mixes to drop into your project so that there's usually going to be like a drum intro and a drum outro, and you might want to jump between those sections in particular to find a nicely isolated kick. Sometimes they might be high pass filtered, so you want to like pay attention, listen, make sure that you're hearing a full sounding click. Then all you're going to want to do is like Command E, crop out the kick like this, and then what you can do is drag that into an Ableton MIDI track or an Ableton Simpler, and then you have this kick. Once you have the kick in here, you can then adjust the fade out time here to try to get rid of any, kind of tighten up the kick at all. But the main thing that you're going to want to do is you want to go over to controls, and you want to go over to envelope over here, and you'll notice that the amount is set to 72. So normally it's like this, and this frequency amount, the filter, is normally all the way up here. So this is what that sample sounds like originally. And so the idea here is you want to roll off a bunch of that like hi-hat sound or whatever is kind of coming through. So if we dial this in, you can get rid of it quite a bit, but then it kind of has that muffled poo-poo kind of sound. So by going into the envelope and bringing this up all the way, it will make sure that it's using the envelope to filter everything out. So you're still getting like the click and the punch of the kick, and removing that hi-hat sound without messing around too much with the actual tone of the kick. So it's a great way to isolate out the kick. Other than that, what we have going on here with this kick in terms of sound design is just rolling off a little bit of the highs using a high shelf here. Similar idea almost to the envelope, where if you're using just like a straight, like this kind of like a classic roll off, you can hear it really muffles it in a way where if you use the high pass shelf like this, or the high shelf, it'll get rid of the highs in a more natural sounding way and keep a lot more of the characteristic of the kick. Other than that, running it into a little bit of a one knob saturation. It's just Ableton Saturator, just mapped it to one knob, just makes it easier for me to use, and I can mostly use my ear instead of my eye when I'm using this. And that really is a look at the kick. Other than that, the main thing that I do want to kind of point out is that a big concept here is that I have also mapped this reference track, so it's the actual tune that we've been working on here. And if I press the S key, it'll flick between the reference track and what I'm working on here. So I can flick between them and use that to get the volumes correct. And really the volumes is going to be kind of is that 80-20 rule of making house music in a really, really quick and efficient way. By being able to reference against the original track like this, you can select the right sounds and you can set the right volumes for those sounds and also find out the right patterns. And that's going to really be your fast track here. So that's really what I did. That's why there's not too much in terms of any sound design going on, because the kick has been extracted from the track. So that's the sound selections right there. And then the volumes have been set by flicking back and forth between the reference track. Next up is the open hi-hat. And so if we have a look at the pattern, it's just that offbeat kind of classic open hi-hat sound. Again, what I did here, the main thing when choosing the sound was flicking back and forth. Like that, essentially is the idea. To select the right sound, make sure that the note is in the right place, all that kind of stuff. Then other than that, in terms of the sound design, the only other thing that I've really done is I've tightened it up just with this envelope, just kind of tightening it up a little bit. Or not envelope, I guess the fade out, the end sample bit, whatever this is, this little flag. And then in terms of any processing that's going on here, we're removing a whole bunch of the lows to make sure that there's nothing kind of obstructing the kick at all, just making sure we just have the highs coming through for the hi-hat here. And then I have this one knob transient designer that I've just mapped some of the macros to, and we're just tightening up the sustain so that it's a bit tighter of a sound as well. A little bit of one knob sidechain. What I have here is it's, instead of mapping it to the kick, it's set to an LFO, so it's just doing quarter notes, which is usually what the kick is doing anyways in this style of music. It's just a little bit easier, one knob style. I usually like doing that just quicker, kind of a mix as you go idea. And then a little bit of one knob saturation as well, adding a bit of color and body to the open hi-hat sound as well. Main thing though, again, is getting the volumes right. Next up is the open hi-hat, or the closed hats. If we have a look at the pattern here, main thing I usually start with is something like this. So what I've highlighted here is that same kind of offbeat bit. So having a closed hi-hat that also does that, it kind of reinforces the open hi-hat and makes it sound a little bit more better, I guess you could say. But it also allows you in the arrangement to have that closed hi-hat driving the track, and then you could bring in the open hi-hat to bring in energy at different points. What I've done here is just added some different layers so that there's kind of, it's not playing on every note, every other note, as you can see. Just add some character and dynamics to the closed hi-hat, and then I've just added that little shuffle at the beginning to make it interesting, and only added at the beginning so it's kind of in a way a call and response. So there's the call here and there's nothing responding. That would still be some kind of call and response. That's kind of the main idea with the hats in terms of the pattern. Again, the sound selection and the volumes is the main thing, so flicking back and forth, right, making sure the sound selection and the volumes are correct. And then in terms of any additional processing, using that transient designer again to remove some of the sustain to tighten up the sound, and then a little bit of one knob saturation to add in some beef, some harmonic content there, basically filling it out a little bit more. Next thing that I'll usually add in is the snare. And so if we have a look at the pattern here, main thing is that this is the main snare here, so it's happening on the 2 and the 4 and the 2 and the 4. And then I've added some additional snares at different points here just to kind of change up the sound a bit and keep it moving and dynamic kind of idea. The main idea again is focusing on the reference track, flicking back and forth. Like that. Kind of trying to do it in time like that, so you can almost imagine your snare coming into that track. using that to pick the right sounds and set the right volumes is really the main key there. Then in terms of any processing, we are removing some of the lows, making sure that the kick and the subs and all that can come through nicely. A little bit of that Transient Designer, removing some of the sustain to tighten up the sound a bit. And again, a little bit of saturation to fill out the sound, add some body to it. Kind of see the pattern that's going on here. This is what makes mixing as you go so easy and efficient, when you can kind of create your own channel strip like this and have the same really subtle moves that you're doing every time and mostly focusing on the volume. It can be very, very, very simple. And you don't have to overthink the mixing in this way too. Next up is the claps. So the claps, whenever I'm listening to this against the reference track, I'm usually listening for where the snare would be more down the center. The claps are usually going to be a bit more stereo. So let's have a listen. Okay, so I think that sounds pretty close. It's not perfect, but we're getting in the right area. In terms of the pattern, what we have here is mostly, as you can see here, it's happening on the 2 and the 4, reinforcing the snare. What I did do is if you zoom in a bit, I just moved them off the actual grid a little bit, so it kind of has that like flam kind of sound where it's not hitting directly. It sounds a little bit more natural, like an actual clap would be. You can see that's kind of just manually done across the grid here. In terms of the sound design, again, main thing is flicking between the reference track and this to get the volumes and the sound selection right. At that point, it's just these kind of very typical moves, which is removing some of the lows, tightening up with removing some of the sustain, adding in some body with the saturation. And in this case, I do have this one knob width plugin, which is pushing it to the left and right a bit more and taking it out of the center, so that it's leaving room for the snare and adding that nice stereo sound. Now here is where things get a little bit more interesting. So these I would say so far that we've went through is kind of the core sounds, the kick, the open hat, the hats, snares, claps. Then usually what I like to do is add in top loops to kind of create a lot more character and groove to the drum track. And this is also where it'll start to take on a new life of its own. So usually the idea is to start with a reference track, build it up against that, and then to slowly start moving into a direction that's more unique so you can release it as an actual song. So if you listen to the reference track, you can hear there's quite a bit other drums going on, and that's where this is going to start coming into play. So first I have this zappy break bit. It's very subtle in the mix. I just turned it on. You could probably barely tell, but if I bring up the volume, so this is what this sounds like. The idea here is just looking through drum breaks, searching that in what's called splice or whatever you want to use, and then layering it in to taste. In terms of any kind of what would you say, processing, same moves, removing a bunch of the lows, pumping it with some sidechain, so it's going again, like making room for the kick and the sub, and then also giving it a bit of groove, and then a bit of the width plugin to push it to the left and right a little bit. Next up, we have this sound here, which is kind of adding a little bit of that like percussion sound, I would say. And what do we have in here in terms of the removing some of the lows, again, sidechain and a little bit of width. And then we have this hip break. And this is adding a lot more of that, like if you listen to the reference track, you could hear there's kind of like a lot of hi-hats. This is what's really bringing that to life right here. In terms of sound design, again, same kind of stuff. What we have is removing some of the lows, shoveling out a little bit of the highs, bringing back the sustain a little bit, pumping it even more with some sidechain. I have a utility on here. I guess at certain points in the arrangement, I bring up the volume of this track, and then width again, making more stereo, pushing it to the left and right. So you can hear now, with all these together, it's starting to add a little bit of character. I feel like even these two could maybe even be removed. They're so subtle that they're almost too subtle, but I guess it is what it is. It's what I added. So we got even more. We have one last one here, which this is this weird rustling sound. This is obviously something that's nothing close to in the actual track. And it's something more unique, something that I added to make it a little bit more interesting and unique to my own style. So again, processing, just moving some of the lows, sidechain, so it's pumping and adding some groove, and that's really about it. So you can see it's all kind of subtlety, slowly adding in different layers. And then we do have the shaker layer. Bring up the volume. And this is adding a lot to that kind of original reference track sound. Just found a cool shaker loop on Splice, dialed it in to taste with the volume, removing a ton of the lows, so it's mostly kind of adding some high-end energy. We have some sidechain, again, pumping it, grooving it out, some saturation so that it is filling up the sound a bit, and some width, so we're pushing it left and right. We do have the shake hats one as well. So this, bring up the volume so you can hear it. So this is really bringing in quite a bit of that, like, that hi-hat sound from the reference track. We listen back. You can hear there's quite a bit of it. And so over here, again, same kind of typical moves, removing some of the lows, sidechain, but it there. And then other than that, I do have this kind of fills little bit, which I'll show you, that just comes in every once in a while to just add some kind of character. So in this case, it's more of an arrangement bit. It comes in every once in a while as a fill, and now it's going to come in right now. Bring in the volume. It's just another drum break that sometimes I've sliced up, if you can see here, to come in, just change up the sound a bit. Sometimes as a fill, nothing too crazy. And if I let the loop go, I also have a ride here. Bring up the volume. And this is just a classic 909 ride, playing similar pattern as the open hi-hat. And nothing too crazy in terms of any processing. This is an older channel strip that I used to use for moving some of the lows, tightening it up to sustain, and then some sidechain for pumping. Ride is a nice way to build up the energy throughout the track. We'll get more into that into the arrangement bit of things. Hello again, my friend. Hopefully you found that video useful. If you'd like to follow along yourself with the 5-step song finishing checklist, there will be a link in the description below where you can get access to that completely for free, and it's going to help you finish your songs a lot faster and better than ever before. If you found this video useful, like and subscribe and all that good stuff, but really the best thing I can do for you is hook you up with that free checklist, so make sure you check that one. Other than that, I'll see you in the next video, my friend. Have a good one.